Dance this tango and I'll marry you." The millionaire laughed, his voice echoing through the gold-lit hall like a dare thrown at fate. Nobody expected those words, least of all the woman holding a silver tray at the edge of the crowd. That one sentence, spoken in mockery under Lagos chandeliers, would later silence every mouth that had laughed with him that night. But for now, the music was still playing, the champagne still flowing, and no one knew the storm that was coming. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you are following us from. Obinna Kalu's mansion in Ikoyi was the kind of place where power had perfume. The men wore confidence sharper than their tuxedos, and the women shimmered in diamonds heavy enough to anchor dreams. The air buzzed with polite laughter, political promises, and the sweet scent of imported roses wilting under the Nigerian heat. The gala was meant to honor Kalu Holdings' new charity wing, though everyone knew it was really a celebration of Obinna himself, Lagos's golden son who had turned code into gold. Amara Ease moved silently among them, her steps careful, her eyes lowered. She'd been hired through an agency that never bothered to learn her story, but under the starched uniform, she carried something no guest in that hall possessed: pride untouched by money. She noticed everything: the fake smiles, the nervous glances, the tiny tremors in Obinna's left hand every time someone mentioned his late wife, Nena. The band began to play a tango, out of place, exotic, chosen to impress the foreign investors seated near the front. Obinna stood watching, whiskey in hand, a man who had everything yet looked half alive. When his friend Tega nudged him and joked about his forgotten dance skills, Obinna laughed louder than he should have. He turned his gaze toward Amara, who was refilling glasses with practiced grace. "Let the maid dance this tango," he said, a grin slicing across his face. "If she pulls it off, I'll marry her myself." Laughter erupted. Cameras flashed. The crowd turned to Amara, expecting her to shrink, but she didn't. For one brief second, she looked him dead in the eye, steady, calm, almost daring. And in that silent exchange, something shifted. No one at that gala realized it yet, but the joke had just turned into a prophecy. For a heartbeat, the ballroom forgot how to breathe. The air thickened, every head turning toward the corner where Amara stood. The laughter that had exploded seconds earlier now trembled, uncertain of its own echo. Amara's fingers tightened around the tray until her knuckles whitened. Her heart pounded, not out of fear, but disbelief at how easily power turned dignity into entertainment. She wasn't sure if the heat she felt was from the chandelier lights or from shame burning under her skin. Obinna's grin remained fixed, but behind it was something else, a flicker of curiosity he couldn't name. He had meant the challenge as a joke, the kind of cruel humor the rich shared among themselves, but the way Amara looked back at him unsettled him. Her eyes were calm, not pleading, not angry, just steady. It felt as if she saw right through the tuxedo, the fame, the facade, straight into the emptiness he had tried to bury under applause. Tega Lawson, leaning lazily on the bar, smirked and raised his glass. "Obinna, my guy, are you serious? You want this woman to dance? A maid?" The crowd tittered, eager for permission to laugh again. Obinna lifted his glass in a mock toast. "Why not? Maybe she'll surprise us all." His tone carried amusement, but the edge beneath it was sharp. Somewhere between arrogance and challenge. Amara felt the weight of dozens of eyes crawling over her. Her first instinct was to leave. She could already imagine the laughter that would follow her to the kitchen, the gossip whispered by the other staff. She had seen men like Obinna all her life, men who mistook wealth for worth, who confused cruelty for charm. But something in her refused to walk away. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the ghost of her father who used to say, "When they try to make you small, stand taller, even if your feet shake." She placed the tray on the nearest table and straightened her back. The music continued in the background, the band playing uncertainly, unsure whether to stop or fill the silence. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice low but clear, "I wasn't hired to dance." The room stirred. Some gasped softly, others chuckled at her boldness. Obinna tilted his head, studying her like a riddle he didn't quite understand. "That's true," he said after a pause, "but sometimes life gives us roles we didn't apply for." He smiled, the kind of smile that could charm a crowd and wound a soul at the same time. "Just one dance, Amara, one tango. Show us what dignity looks like in motion." The bandleader, sensing tension thick enough to slice, hesitated with his violin bow raised halfway. "Should we, sir?" Obinna nodded once. The tango's rhythm began again, soft at first, sultry, filling the hall like smoke. Amara stood still. Inside, her pulse raced, but outwardly, she was composed. She looked at the polished floor, at her reflection shimmering in the marble, at her bare wrist where a bracelet used to be, one she had pawned last year to buy medicine for her mother. A sudden calm took over her. She lifted her chin, unbuttoned the cuffs of her uniform sleeves, and stepped forward. Every movement drew eyes. The sound of her bare feet against the floor was quiet but commanding. The first few steps were hesitant, the rhythm unfamiliar after years of scrubbing floors instead of stages. Then her body remembered. Years ago, before poverty clipped her wings, she had studied dance at the University of Nigeria. She had felt music, not as sound, but as heartbeat. That heartbeat returned now, pulsing through her fingers, her spine, her breath. Obinna laughed softly, a little forced, pretending not to be intrigued. "You see, she accepted. Lagos never disappoints," he said to the guests, masking unease behind humor. But the laughter around him didn't come as easily anymore. Something about the way Amara moved commanded silence. She didn't dance for him. She danced like she was shaking off years of silence. The crowd leaned forward. Her arms sliced through the air with precision, her steps tracing emotions too complex for words. Even the chandeliers seemed to watch. Halfway through, Obinna found himself stepping closer. He hadn't danced since Nena's funeral. He used to glide effortlessly, but tonight his body felt foreign. Still, when Amara turned and met his gaze, something primal pulled him forward. Without thinking, he joined her. Gasps rippled through the room. The millionaire and the maid face to face. Their steps collided at first, his too rigid, hers too fluid. He tried to lead, she didn't follow. Her rhythm was alive, unpredictable, full of pain and power. When he stumbled slightly, she caught his hand before he could fall, the gesture small but intimate. He looked down at their joined hands, and for the first time that night, forgot to smile. Tega raised his phone to capture the scene, whispering, "This one go trend by morning." A few guests chuckled nervously, but most remained still, spellbound. The dance had become something else, something raw. It wasn't about money or mockery anymore. It was confession disguised as motion. The violin climbed higher, the rhythm sharper. Obinna's breath grew uneven. He saw flashes, Nena's laughter at their wedding, her pale hands in the hospital bed, the same song playing faintly on the radio the night she died. His chest tightened. He blinked, and for a fleeting moment, Amara's face blurred with hers. Amara saw it too, the sorrow behind his arrogance. She moved closer, their steps synchronizing now, not as equals in status, but as survivors in pain. When the final note trembled into silence, she stopped just short of his chest. The hall was so quiet they could hear each other breathing. Obinna looked down at her, sweat glistening on his temple. He opened his mouth to say something clever, something that would erase the vulnerability he felt, but nothing came out. Amara lowered her gaze, curtsied slightly and whispered, "You wanted a dance, sir, not my silence." Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing through the hall like truth itself. No one clapped. No one laughed. The millionaire stood in the center of his grand hall, surrounded by people too afraid to meet his eyes. For the first time in years, Obinna Kalu felt small. And somewhere deep inside, something old and buried began to stir. Something that would not let him rest until he faced the storm he had just unleashed. The next morning, the mansion was quieter than a church after confession. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, all gone, leaving only echoes that refused to fade. Obinna sat alone in his study, curtains drawn, sunlight trying to sneak through the cracks. His tie hung loose around his neck, and the whiskey from last night still clung to the air. He hadn't slept. The image of Amara's face, calm yet defiant, kept replaying behind his eyes. Every time he blinked, he saw her walking away, her footsteps slicing through the silence of the gala like judgment. He told himself it was nothing, just pride wounded by a servant's courage. But the truth was messier than that. She had stripped him bare in front of everyone without saying a cruel word. She had shown him something money couldn't buy, self-respect. Downstairs, the household buzzed with a nervous kind of gossip. The staff whispered in corners, their voices thin as smoke. The story had already traveled beyond the mansion's gates. Some said the boss had lost his mind, others said the maid had bewitched him. By breakfast, every gossip blog in Lagos was already feeding on the story. Billionaire challenges maid to tango, gets schooled in style. When Amara arrived that morning, she kept her eyes on the ground. She had thought of quitting, of walking away without her pay, but pride stopped her. If she left without a word, it would mean he had won. She'd face him, even if it cost her job. The manager, a short man with nervous eyes named Collins, rushed to her. "Amara, madam wants to see you." He lowered his voice. "They say you're being let go." She nodded slowly, not surprised. Upstairs, Obinna pretended to read a report, but the words blurred on the page. When Amara entered, he didn't look up immediately. "You're late," he said, his voice clipped. She didn't answer. He finally raised his eyes. Her uniform was spotless, her posture straight, her face unreadable. "You embarrassed me last night," he said. "You think you can walk into my ballroom and challenge me in front of my guests?" His tone was hard, but it cracked slightly at the edges. Amara didn't flinch. "You asked me to dance, sir. I only gave you what you demanded." She paused, then added quietly, "Maybe you didn't expect honesty in the movement." His hand tightened on the pen he wasn't writing with. "You think that was honesty?" he said, standing up. "That was rebellion." Her gaze met his. "Sometimes they're the same thing." The words landed heavy between them. Obinna turned away, walking toward the window. The city stretched out beyond the glass, Lagos alive and indifferent. He could see the reflection of his own face in the window, tired, hollow-eyed, older than his years. "You're fired," he said finally. "I know," she replied. He turned, surprised by how calmly she said it. No pleading, no tears, just acceptance. She reached into her pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on his desk. "That's my resignation letter. I thought you might prefer to think it was your choice." Then she looked at him one last time. "You said I embarrassed you, but maybe you were already embarrassed by what you've become." Obinna's jaw tightened. "What's your tongue, girl?" "I did," she said softly. "Last night, and it spoke anyway." She turned to leave. He wanted to say something, anything, to take back control of the moment, but nothing came. The sound of her footsteps faded down the corridor, steady and unhurried. When the door closed, the silence pressed in like a weight. For the rest of the day, he couldn't shake her words. Meetings blurred together, calls went unanswered, and even Tega's usual jokes failed to spark a smile. Late in the evening, when the sky turned the color of burnt honey, Obinna drove through the city without purpose. The streets glowed with headlights and street vendors shouting over car horns. He ended up at the marina, parking by the water where Lagos whispered its secrets through the tide. He thought of Nena, his late wife. She had danced like Amara once, freely, fearlessly. The night before their wedding, she had told him, "If you ever forget you're human, dance with someone who remembers." He had laughed then. Now the memory felt like a curse. At the same time, Amara was sitting in a small room she rented in Surulere, staring at a flickering bulb. The day had been long. The message from the agency confirmed her dismissal. Her hands ached. Her mind replayed the night over and over. She had stood up to him, yes, but what came next? Lagos was not kind to women without powerful friends. She sighed and reached for the small notebook on her table. On the first page, written years ago, were her father's words. "Strength is silent, but people always hear it. A knock on the door startled her. It was her neighbor, Mama Toby, carrying a bowl of rice and stew. "You didn't eat all day, my dear," the woman said, setting it down. "People are talking about you on the internet. You made the rich man dance, eh? I told them Amara from Enugu no be small girl." Amara smiled faintly, too tired to correct her. She wasn't interested in fame. She only wanted peace. Meanwhile, Obinna's phone buzzed non-stop. The tabloids had picked up the video someone had recorded at the gala. His PR team begged him to issue a statement, but he refused. Let them talk. He wasn't angry anymore, not even humiliated, just haunted. He watched the clip again on his phone. The moment when Amara caught his hand mid-fall, replayed in slow motion. Her eyes, steady, almost kind, cut deeper than any insult. He poured himself another drink, then pushed it away untouched. Something inside him was shifting. He didn't want to admit it, but that dance had shaken him more than any business loss ever could. It wasn't attraction, it was confrontation. She had forced him to see the man behind the money, and he didn't like what he saw. Back in Surulere, Amara packed her few belongings into a small suitcase. She'd find another job, she always did. But as she looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror, she whispered, "You didn't bow, Amara. You stood." In Ikoyi, Obinna stood on his balcony, watching the city lights shimmer like restless stars. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own laughter, the kind that filled rooms but emptied him inside. He remembered the words he had shouted across that ballroom, words meant as a joke. "Dance this tango and I'll marry you." Now they sounded like prophecy, not humor. He closed his eyes and saw her again, not as a maid, not as a challenge, but as a mirror, and something deep in his chest whispered that this wasn't over. Rain fell over Lagos that evening, like the sky had decided to confess something. The streets shimmered, headlights slicing through puddles, horns crying into the humid night. In the heart of Ikoyi, Obinna Kalu's mansion glowed faintly behind its high gates, every window reflecting his unrest. He had spent 3 days pretending to move on. Meetings, interviews, even laughter at a business lunch. But Amara's face kept interrupting his thoughts. It wasn't her defiance that haunted him. It was the grace she carried, even while being mocked. The more he tried to bury the memory, the deeper it clawed into him. Inside his study, the tango music played softly from a speaker, an unintentional loop left running from his phone. The same melody from that night. He should have turned it off, but instead, he poured a drink and let it fill the room. Each note pressed against the silence, dragging him back to that ballroom, to the moment his arrogance met her calm. His reflection in the window stared back, a stranger in his own house. He muttered to himself, "Why can't I stop thinking about her?" Tega walked in without knocking, as always, wearing his careless grin and a suit that screamed money and mischief. "You've gone quiet, Obinna. The city's talking, but you hiding in your mansion like a monk. That's not my guy." He poured himself a drink from the decanter. "All Lagos thinks you fell for that maid." Obinna shot him a look. "People always think they know things they don't. Then prove them wrong," Tega said, half amused. "You fire the girl, you move on. End of story." "I did fire her," Obinna replied. "She's gone." Tega chuckled, swirling his drink. "Then why do I still hear the tango?" Obinna didn't answer. He turned off the music abruptly and walked toward the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of thunder. "She wasn't just dancing," he said finally. "She was fighting me, without words. Like she was trying to show me something I refused to see." Tega raised a brow. "You sure it's not guilt talking? Or maybe loneliness wearing a new face?" Obinna ignored the jab. His phone buzzed with a message from Collins, the house manager. "Sir, I found the resignation letter you asked me to file. Do you still want me to send her pay through the agency?" He typed back quickly, "No, I'll handle it myself." The next morning, before sunrise, he drove himself, a rare thing, to Surulere. The guards were shocked. Obinna Kalu didn't drive, not through the chaos of the mainland, but that day he didn't care about image. He needed to see her, needed to say something he hadn't yet understood himself. The narrow streets were waking up. Vendors setting up stalls, children chasing stray goats, music leaking from radios tuned to early morning talk shows. He found the address from the agency's file, a small two-room building with peeling paint. A woman in a wrapper sat on the steps, shelling groundnuts. "Good morning," he said awkwardly. "I'm looking for Amara Ease." The woman eyed him curiously. "You're the big man from the story, Abby? She no day here. She go work early. She teach dance to the children for that community center yonder." She pointed down the dusty road. Obinna thanked her and followed the direction. The community center was a cracked building with faded murals of smiling faces. Through the open doorway, he heard music, soft drums and laughter. Inside, Amara stood barefoot on a concrete floor, surrounded by children trying to mimic her movements. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, her hair tied back, but she glowed, not with glamour, but with life. He watched quietly from the door. The children clapped in rhythm, giggling as she twirled one of them gently. When she finally noticed him, her body stilled. The music faded, and the children looked between them with wide eyes. "Mr. Kalu," she said calmly, wiping her hands, "you lost your way." "No," he said, stepping closer. "I came to find it." The children exchanged whispers until Amara gestured for them to go outside. When they left, the air between them thickened again, like that night at the gala. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "Maybe not," he replied, "but I had to." He looked around at the cracked walls, the broken fans, the light streaming through holes in the roof. "You teach dance here?" "I teach whoever wants to move," she said. "You'd be surprised how much pain rhythm can carry." He took a slow breath. "I wanted to apologize for humiliating you." She crossed her arms. "You didn't humiliate me, sir. You humiliated yourself. I just happened to be there when it happened." Her words cut, but they were clean, precise. He didn't flinch. "Maybe that's true," he said softly. "But when you danced, I felt something. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now." She tilted her head slightly. "And what do you understand?" "That I haven't been living," he said, "just existing. Ever since Nena died, I buried myself in noise, business, parties, people who talk too much but say nothing. That night, when you looked at me, I saw the emptiness I built around myself. It terrified me." Amara's expression softened just a little. "Grief makes fools of us all, Mr. Kalu. But some of us don't have the luxury to hide inside mansions." He nodded. "You're right. He hesitated. "When I challenged you, I thought I was in control, but you were the one leading all along." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "That's how tango works, sir. You can't force rhythm. You listen, or you fall." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The sound of children laughing outside drifted in. Obinna looked at her and said, "Dance with me, one last time. No cameras, no audience, just us." Amara hesitated. "Why?" "Because I need to finish what I started." She studied his face. He didn't look like the man who had mocked her that night. There was weariness now, but also humility. Slowly, she nodded. He took a step forward, removing his jacket, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dusty floor. The music from the speaker started again, a low, rhythmic melody. Amara closed her eyes for a second, then placed her hand in his. Their palms met, warm, human, flawed. This time, he didn't try to lead. He followed. Their steps were clumsy, their movements imperfect, yet somehow real. Each motion carried years of unspoken grief, pride, and forgiveness. The children peeked through the doorway, whispering excitedly, but neither of them noticed. When the song ended, they didn't speak. Amara's eyes glistened, but she blinked it away. Obinna bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he said, voice low. She nodded. "Go home, Mr. Kalu. You've already danced more than most men ever will." He smiled faintly, almost painfully, then turned and walked toward the door. Outside, the light had shifted, the kind of golden brightness that follows a heavy rain. He looked back once and saw her laughing with the children again, her bare feet moving lightly across the cracked concrete. And for the first time in years, Obinakalu felt something move inside him, something that wasn't money, wasn't guilt, but life itself. The dance had begun long before he realized it, and this time he was finally listening to the rhythm. That night, Obina couldn't sleep. The city outside was loud as always. Sirens, laughter, the endless hum of generators. But inside his chest, there was a silence so deep it frightened him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the community hall again. Amara's bare feet gliding across cracked concrete, her eyes calm, her movement effortless. It wasn't just a dance anymore. It was memory disguised as motion. He had spent years pretending to live while drifting through life like a man underwater, and now she had pulled him to the surface without saying a word. The tango rhythm still played in his head, twisting around his heartbeat. He walked through his mansion barefoot, the marble floor cold under his feet. The portraits on the wall seemed to watch him. In one, Nena smiled beside him, her eyes bright, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He stopped, studying her face as if it could still speak. It struck him how long it had been since he'd really looked at that photo. It used to hurt too much. Now it felt different. The pain wasn't gone, but it had shape, it had color again. He whispered to the picture, "You'd have liked her." The memory of Nena's last dance came back like a film reel unspooling. It was their anniversary, just weeks before the diagnosis. She had dragged him to the middle of their living room, laughing as she pressed play on a scratched record. "Come on, Obina, stop counting beats and start feeling them," she had said. He'd stepped on her foot twice, and she had laughed until tears ran down her face. That sound had filled every corner of the house, and when she fell ill, the laughter vanished first. By the time the music stopped, he hadn't realized it would take years before he'd hear it again. He sat down on the couch, staring at nothing. The rain outside started again, soft at first, then heavier. In the glass reflection, he saw himself, older, wearier, but still standing. For the first time, he didn't look away. Across the city, Amara sat by her window, tracing raindrops as they slid down the glass. The room was quiet, except for the muffled laughter of children playing outside under the rain, ignoring their mother's shouts. She smiled faintly. She'd stayed at the center late, teaching them how to turn rhythm into courage. Dance had always been her language, one her father understood better than anyone. She still remembered the sound of his voice the day he told her to chase her dreams. He had worked as a carpenter all his life, hands rough as bark, but gentle when they touched her hair. "You carry light in your body, Amara," he used to say. "When the world tries to dim it, move. Don't explain, just move." But the world had dimmed it anyway. When Kalu Holdings bought their family land in Enugu years ago, her father lost everything. He died a year later, his heart worn down by debt and shame. Amara had never blamed Obina personally. He was just a name on a contract, a ghost behind signatures. But when she recognized that name again, printed on the mansion gate where she worked, her stomach had turned cold. That night at the gala wasn't just humiliation. It was fate circling back, forcing her to look power in the eye. Now, sitting in her small room, she tried not to think about him, but the thought refused to leave. She saw the way he looked during the dance at the center, how his arrogance had melted into something human. She'd told herself he didn't deserve her forgiveness, yet part of her wondered if forgiveness wasn't the only thing that could free them both. Back in Ikoyi, Obinna poured another glass of water and walked toward the piano that sat untouched in his living room. Nena used to play it, mostly late at night when she thought he was asleep. He sat on the bench, his fingers hesitant at first, then pressing one key, then another. The sound was uneven, clumsy, but alive. The same tango melody stumbled out of the instrument, broken but recognizable. The sound filled the mansion with something that hadn't existed there for years, imperfection that still mattered. He picked up his phone, typed Amara's number from the agency file, and stared at it. His thumb hovered over the call button. But what would he even say? "I'm sorry." It sounded too small. He dropped the phone and leaned back, eyes closing as the music replayed in his head. The flashbacks came harder now, Nena's laughter blending with Amara's defiance, the gala crowd frozen like statues the moment his hand slipped during the dance and she caught him. It wasn't just memory, it was movement threaded through time, connecting what was broken to what could still be whole. The next morning, Lagos wore the scent of wet earth. Obinna drove to the marina again, craving the quiet hum of the water. The city was awake. Hawkers shouting, radios blaring, but he heard only the sound of the tide. A group of young men nearby practiced dance steps under the pavilion roof, their shoes tapping rhythm against the floor. Their laughter reminded him of the kids at Amara's center. He watched them, something stirring in his chest. Later that day, he walked into his office at Kalu Holdings. His employees stared, surprised to see him without a suit jacket. He looked different, lighter somehow. He called a meeting, and when his assistant asked for the agenda, he simply said, "Change." Nobody understood what that meant yet, not even him. Meanwhile, Amara prepared for her next class at the center. The children were already there, barefoot and restless. She clapped her hands, calling for attention. "Today, we dance not for fun, but for truth," she told them. "Every movement must mean something. Every step must say what your mouth can't." She moved with them, the music vibrating through her bones, but halfway through the lesson she froze. The doorway framed a familiar figure, Obinna, standing silently, watching. The children gasped. "Auntie Amara, that's the big man," one whispered. She turned, her heartbeat quick but her face calm. Obinna raised a hand slightly, a gesture halfway between greeting and apology. "I didn't come to disrupt," he said. "I came to remember." The children stepped aside instinctively. Without waiting for permission, he took a slow step forward, the floor dusty beneath his polished shoes. "I used to think dance was just movement," he said, voice low. "Now I know it's memory in motion." He looked at her. "Teach me again." Amara hesitated. The class watched, wide-eyed. The music started, drums steady, simple. She nodded once and took his hand. This time, there was no hesitation, no pride. Their steps matched slowly, the rhythm steady, their eyes locked not in challenge but understanding. Around them, the children clapped, laughter filling the hall like sunlight. But between them, something heavier moved. Grief, forgiveness, and the fragile thread of change. As they danced, the past and present blurred. Obinna saw flashes of his wife's laughter blending with Amara's quiet strength, his father's lessons about pride, his own reflection dissolving into the crowd. Amara felt her father's voice guiding her steps, reminding her that dignity was not silence, it was motion. The rhythm carried them both, two broken people finding balance in the space between beats. When the song ended, the room stood still. Neither spoke. The children cheered without understanding the weight of what they'd witnessed. Obinna's hand lingered near hers for a moment before he stepped back. Their eyes met, and in that silence, both understood that something had shifted again, subtly, permanently. The dance had become memory, and the memory had finally begun to move. The next morning arrived heavy with unspoken words. Lagos was already awake, restless as always, but inside the Kalu mansion the air felt trapped, like even the walls knew something had changed. Obinna sat at the edge of his bed, half-dressed, staring at his phone. He had received a dozen messages overnight, journalists requesting statements, invitations to interviews, gossip blogs, twisting his visit to the community center into a romantic scandal. "Billionaire falls for maid-turned-dance teacher," one headline read. Another said, "From humiliation to obsession, Lagos's richest man caught dancing in the slums." He dropped the phone on the table, disgusted. They made a circus out of sincerity. All he had wanted was to understand something about himself. But now, the city wanted to turn it into another show. He left the house without breakfast, without a driver, and found himself parked once again outside the community center. He didn't even know why he had come, only that he couldn't stay away. But when he stepped out of the car, the laughter he'd expected wasn't there. The place was closed. A small group of children sat outside, their faces drawn. One of them recognized him. "Enti Amara no come today," the boy said quietly. "Some men from the company came. They said the land go be used for construction." Obinna froze. His own company. He didn't need to ask which department. Real estate expansion had been one of his most profitable divisions. They'd probably followed standard procedure: find underused land, clear it fast, don't ask questions. But now the decision sat on his chest like a stone. "Who sent them?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The boy shrugged. "They say Big Oga from Kalu Holdings." By the time he reached the site office downtown, anger burned under his calm exterior. His employees stared when he stormed in, ignoring the greetings. He went straight to the department head's desk. "Who authorized the demolition notice for the community center in Surulere?" The manager blinked, confused. "Sir, it was part of the redevelopment plan you signed last year. We assumed—" "You assumed wrong," Obinna snapped. "Cancel it. Immediately." The man hesitated. "But sir, equipment already on site." "Then pull them out." His voice cut through the office like a blade. Hours later, he found Amara at a bus stop near the market, her bag clutched tight, her expression unreadable. She had heard. He could tell by the stillness in her shoulders, the way she didn't turn when he approached. "Amara," he said carefully, "I didn't know about the construction. I swear, I didn't." She finally looked at him, her eyes calm but sharp. "Your name is on every gate in this city, sir. You may not know everything it destroys, but destruction still happens under your watch." "I stopped it," he said, voice low. "No one will touch that place again." Her lips curved slightly. Not a smile, not forgiveness. "You stopped it today. What about tomorrow? Or the next place?" She stepped closer. "You dance when you want to feel human. But people like me don't have the luxury to dance for healing. We dance to survive." He flinched at the words. There was no anger in her tone, which somehow made them hit harder. She turned to leave, but he reached out impulsively, catching her wrist. "Please," he said, "don't walk away like this." She stopped, but didn't face him. "You still don't understand. Walking away is all people like me ever get to do." She freed her hand, and the space between them felt heavier than a shout. That night, back at the mansion, Obinna sat in the dark, whiskey untouched beside him. His father's old portrait hung over the fireplace, a stern man with the same eyes, the same hunger for control. Obinna stared at it and muttered, "You built empires. I built walls." He grabbed the glass, then threw it against the floor. It shattered, the sound sharp, final. The silence afterward felt like punishment. Meanwhile, Amara returned to the community center, now empty. The children had gone home. The lights were off. She stood in the middle of the floor where she had danced with him days earlier. Her footsteps echoed softly. She felt exhaustion crawl through her body, the kind that wasn't just physical. For years, she had carried herself with quiet pride, believing strength meant never letting emotion break the surface. But tonight, alone under the flickering light, she let her guard slip. Her eyes stung. She began to move, slowly at first, then faster, her body twisting with anger and grief. The rhythm of the rain outside became her music. Each motion was sharper than the last, until her foot hit a loose board and pain shot through her ankle. She stumbled, falling to her knees. For the first time since she was a child, she cried. No audience, no performance, just a woman breaking quietly in the dark. At the same time, Obinna found himself driving aimlessly through the city. The rain came down harder, blurring his windshield. He stopped at a traffic light and saw a billboard, his own face staring back, advertising a new luxury project. Kalu Holdings, building the future. The irony twisted in his stomach. He'd built everything except himself. He drove without direction until the streets grew emptier, the neighborhoods rougher. He didn't even realize where he was headed until the familiar cracked walls of the community center appeared through the rain. He parked and stepped out into the downpour. The door was unlocked. Inside, dim light flickered across the walls. Then he saw her, sitting on the floor, drenched, her head bowed, shoulders trembling. For a moment, he didn't move. He felt like an intruder in her pain. Finally, he spoke softly. "Amara." She looked up, startled, quickly wiping her face. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," he said, walking closer. "But here we are." Water dripped from his suit. The room smelled of dust and rain. She tried to stand, but winced at her ankle. He reached for her instinctively, and this time she didn't pull away. His hand brushed hers, hesitant but steady. "You don't have to prove strength every minute," he said quietly. "Sometimes silence says more than words." Amara met his gaze, her breath uneven, then listened carefully. She raised her hand, not to caress, but to strike. The sound of her palm against his cheek cracked through the hall like thunder. He didn't move. He didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, eyes wide, as she whispered, "That's for every woman who was laughed at while trying to be seen." The rain roared louder against the roof. He nodded once, the sting on his skin grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I deserved that," he said softly. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "No, Mr. Kalu. You don't deserve pain. You deserve to understand it." She limped toward the door, her wet dress clinging to her. He wanted to stop her, to say something that could fix everything, but he knew nothing could. The silence she left behind was louder than any slap. As the door closed behind her, Obinna exhaled, slow and shaky. He touched his cheek, feeling the warmth of it, the reality. For once, he didn't feel like a millionaire or a man who'd lost control of his empire. He felt like a human being, flawed, stripped bare, and finally awake. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, carving the night into fragments. Inside, the broken man stood in the middle of an empty room, his reflection caught in the puddles on the floor. And in that quiet aftermath, the only sound that remained was the steady rhythm of the rain. Like the faint echo of a tango, no one was laughing at anymore. The morning after the rain, Lagos woke up smelling of metal and smoke. Streets glistened like mirrors cracked by traffic, the noise of the city swelling back into its usual rhythm. But inside the Kalu mansion, silence still ruled. Obinna hadn't slept. He had sat in the living room all night, the slap still burning faintly on his cheek, not as pain, but as memory. He'd replayed every second of the night at the community center, Amara's tears, her words, the way she walked away through the rain without looking back. Something had shifted inside him permanently, though he couldn't name what it was. He only knew that the world no longer looked the same. The maid entered quietly to open the curtains. Morning light spilled into the room, catching the empty glass on the table and the rumpled jacket he hadn't bothered to hang. "Sir, breakfast?" she asked cautiously. He shook his head. "No." She hesitated before whispering, "Sir, the press is waiting at the gate again." He didn't answer. He was too tired to perform another version of himself for the cameras. The man they wanted, the confident, untouchable Obinna Kalu, had been washed away by the storm. When he finally stood up, his reflection in the glass door startled him. His eyes looked older, softer. He walked outside barefoot into the garden. The ground was wet, grass slick beneath his feet. The air carried that post-rain freshness, but it didn't clear his head. He thought about how many times he had laughed at other people's storms, believing his money could shield him from weather. Yet here he was, drenched from the inside out. Later that morning, Tega showed up unannounced as usual. His car horn blared before the gates even opened. When he walked in, the grin he always wore faltered. "My guy, what happened to you?" he asked, throwing himself into a chair. "You look like someone who's been fighting ghosts." Obinna didn't look up from the cup of tea he hadn't touched. "Maybe I have." Tega chuckled awkwardly. "So this is about the woman again? The one from the dance center? Lagos is still talking. You've turned her into a legend." Obinna leaned back, his voice low. "They don't know her. They only know the story they can twist." "Stories sell, bro," Tega said, pouring himself a drink. "You just have to control the ending." "I'm done controlling things," Obinna replied. "All I ever did was control and break everything I touched." Tega frowned, leaning forward. "You're not making sense." That woman humiliated you in public, hit you in the face, and you're sitting here talking like she's your savior. Obina's eyes hardened. She didn't humiliate me. She woke me up. Tega scoffed. You've lost it. Maybe, Obina said quietly, but maybe I finally found something worth losing for. Tega stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. You can't live like this, man. You've got shareholders, investors, a reputation. If you want to play saint, fine, but remember, Lagos doesn't forgive weakness. Obina stood and walked to the window, rainlight still clinging to the glass. Lagos forgives everything except truth, he said. That's what scares them. Tega finished his drink, grabbed his car keys, and left without another word. The sound of the engine faded, leaving behind a hollow quiet. By afternoon, Obina made a decision. He called Collins, his manager, and said, I want every project under review, especially the ones touching local land. Collins stammered in confusion. Sir, that could cost millions. Then it will cost millions, Obina interrupted. Do it anyway. At the same time, in Surulere, Amara sat with her leg propped up, the swollen ankle wrapped in a bandage. Mama Toby hovered nearby, fanning herself with an old newspaper. You think too much, my daughter, she said. Eat something. Amara smiled weakly. Thinking doesn't fill stomachs, Mama. It fills the spirit, the older woman replied. But sometimes it also breaks it. She handed her a steaming bowl of ogbono soup. Eat before it gets cold. Tomorrow will find its own trouble. Amara ate in silence, staring out the window. Children passed by on their way to the center, unaware that it might not reopen. A part of her wanted to fight, call the press, confront the company, shout until someone listened. But she was tired of surviving through noise. The storm had drained her, leaving only quiet determination. When night fell, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it hesitantly. Tomorrow, noon. At the center, please. No name, but she knew. The next day, Obina arrived early. The building still smelled faintly of damp wood and dust. The floorboards where she had fallen were still marked by muddy footprints. He stood there for a while, alone, listening to the city outside, a mixture of voices, traffic, life moving on. Then the door opened. Amara entered, walking carefully, the bandaged foot visible beneath her skirt. She looked at him without greeting. You said you wouldn't come back. I said I didn't deserve to, he replied. But I didn't say I wouldn't try to be better. She crossed her arms. You can't fix the world with guilt, Mr. Kalu. It doesn't work like that. Ma, I'm not trying to fix the world, he said. Just the part I broke. She sighed softly, shaking her head. You didn't break me. I broke something in myself, he said, his eyes steady. And I think you were the only one brave enough to show me where the cracks were. Amara looked away, her expression unreadable. Words are cheap, sir. Lagos is full of men who can talk about change while sitting in air-conditioned offices. Then let me prove it, he said. I'm funding the center, not as charity, as investment in people, not profit. You'll run it your way, no cameras, no press. She blinked, surprised, searching his face for deceit, but finding none. Why me? Because you dance like you're reminding the world it still has a heartbeat, he said simply. The air between them stilled. She didn't answer right away, and for a moment he thought she'd refuse. But then she said quietly, If you mean it, you'll never put your name on the door. I won't, he promised. She nodded slowly. Then we have a deal. Outside, the clouds gathered again, heavy but quiet, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The storm hadn't passed. It had just changed shape. Inside that small, cracked building, two people stood facing each other, not as employer and employee, not as sinner and savior, but as equals in a city that rarely allowed such things. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't punishment. It was peace, waiting to be understood. 3 weeks passed before Lagos caught wind of what was quietly happening in Surulere. Whispers started in church gatherings, spilled into markets, and found their way to glossy magazines. Somebody's funding free dance classes, people said. No sponsor name, no logo, just a small board that says, for those who still believe in movement. At first, no one believed it. Lagos was used to charity being loud, a performance of generosity. But this was different, quiet, consistent, and strangely human. Obinna didn't visit the center every day. He came sometimes in the evenings, after the sun dipped behind the skyline and the city softened into twilight. He'd stand near the wall, not wanting to disturb, just watching as Amara guided the children through routines. The music was never fancy, sometimes an old radio, sometimes someone drumming on a paint bucket, but it worked. Each beat shook the dust from the air and turned the cracked floor into something alive. He had kept his word. His name was nowhere on the project. Even Collins had been confused when Obinna asked him to reroute company funds anonymously. "Sir, investors might—" Obinna cut him off. "They don't need to know everything." The man who once couldn't stand being invisible now preferred it. For the first time, silence felt like freedom instead of absence. But Lagos didn't stay quiet for long. A journalist named Ifeoma Adeyemi began digging around after a source tipped her off about the mystery sponsor. She was sharp, young, and relentless, the kind who smelled stories before they even existed. Her editor thought it was small news, but she had a feeling there was more beneath the surface. "Rich people don't go anonymous unless they're hiding something," she told him. So she drove to Surulere and watched from across the street. It didn't take long to spot the familiar face. Obinna Kalu, billionaire, standing among barefoot children, laughing softly at something Amara said. Her heart skipped. She knew this story. She had covered the humiliation weeks earlier, the viral dance video, the slap heard across social media. But what she saw now didn't match the headlines. He wasn't performing. There were no cameras, no PR team, just a man who looked different, softer, lighter. She took photos quietly, then left before anyone noticed. That night, her article dropped online. "The Billionaire's Redemption: Why Obinna Kalu Funds a Hidden Dance Center in the Slums." The story exploded. Some called it romantic, others manipulative. Some praised him, others mocked him. Lagos divided itself, as it always did, between gossip and grace. By morning, camera crews swarmed the streets outside the community center. Amara found out when she arrived to teach her class. Reporters crowded the door, microphones flashing like weapons. "Miss Ease, is it true you and Mr. Kalu are in love? Did he build this to win you back? Was the slap a publicity stunt?" The questions fired non-stop. She pushed through them, keeping her head down, anger rising like heat under her skin. When she entered the hall, Obinna was already there, reading the article on his phone. She stopped at the doorway. "You said no cameras," she said, voice shaking. "I didn't invite them," he replied quietly. "Someone found out." "They always find out," she said bitterly, "because people like you can't stay hidden for long. The city loves to turn apologies into headlines." Obinna put the phone away. "I'll fix this." She let out a short laugh, half disbelief, half exhaustion. "You can't fix what was never broken. I asked for silence and you brought a storm again." He took a step closer. "Amara, please listen. I didn't want this attention, I swear." "Then what do you want, Mr. Kalu?" she snapped. "Forgiveness? Approval? A new reputation?" He hesitated, his throat tightening. "I want peace." Her expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. "Then stop chasing me through your guilt. Go find it somewhere else." She turned and walked out before he could answer. Cameras followed her, flashes bursting like lightning. That evening, the news hit every channel. "The maid and the millionaire meet again," one anchor said with a smirk. Obinna watched from his car, parked far from the mansion. He turned off the radio halfway through. Every word felt wrong, like they were stealing something fragile and twisting it for entertainment. Later that night, he drove to the marina again, the place that had become his confessional. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the water moved with slow violence. He stood at the edge, phone in hand, scrolling through comments online. Praise, insults, wild theories. It was all noise. Then one caught his eye. A user had posted an old photo of Amara with her father, taken years ago during a university dance showcase. The caption read, "This woman's father lost his land to Kalu Holdings 15 years ago. Everything comes full circle. The truth hit him like a wave. He hadn't known. He had built his empire over the ruins of her family's life. The guilt he'd been feeling wasn't abstract anymore. It had a face, a story, a name. He looked out at the black water, his chest tight. He thought about Nena, about how she used to say that every empire leaves ghosts behind. He had ignored it then. Now he could feel them gathering around him. He didn't sleep. At dawn, he drove to Amara's apartment. She opened the door with tired eyes, her face swollen from crying. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I have to tell you something," he said. "Your father, his land, my company bought it years ago. I didn't know until last night, but it was me, Amara. I took everything from him without even realizing it." She stared at him, her breath catching. "You knew now. That's enough. I want to make it right," he said desperately. "I'll return the land, or pay—" Her voice cut through him. "You can't pay for a man's life. My father died believing he failed, and now you want to buy peace with money?" He lowered his head. "No, I want to buy time, to do something that means something." She shook her head slowly. "Money isn't time, Mr. Kalu. It's noise." He couldn't speak. She stepped back and closed the door, quietly but firmly. He stood there for a long while, listening to the muffled hum of the city rising behind him. Lagos didn't stop for heartbreak. It never did. When he finally drove away, his phone buzzed again, another wave of calls, messages, media requests. He ignored them all. His empire was still intact, his reputation uncertain, his name louder than ever. But deep inside, where no one could see, a quieter truth settled. The real story was not about a millionaire and a maid. It was about a man learning how much noise a single life can make when silence finally speaks. The week after Amara shut the door in his face, Lagos moved like a restless animal. The city forgot nothing, forgave nothing, and fed on spectacle. The headlines refused to die. Pictures of Obinna at her doorstep, blurry phone videos of her entering the center, comments dissecting every look, every gesture. But behind the noise, both of them lived in a silence that stretched tighter with each passing day. Amara kept teaching, pretending nothing had changed, though her eyes betrayed the exhaustion of being watched. Obinna, on the other hand, moved through his office like a ghost, showing up to meetings only to forget what they were about halfway through. His assistants whispered that he looked sick. The truth was simpler. He had never been more awake. By the fourth day, he made another decision. Not to apologize again, not to chase forgiveness, but to tell the truth in public. His truth, not the version Lagos invented. He called his PR manager and said, "I'm holding a press conference tomorrow morning." The woman's voice cracked through the line. "Sir, are you sure? You've been trending for all the wrong reasons." He exhaled slowly. "Then let them trend the truth." That same night, Amara sat in the dim light of her apartment, watching an old dance performance video on her phone, her father clapping in the audience, pride glowing in his eyes. The video cut off right before the power outage that had ended the show. It was his last smile caught on camera. She closed the phone, pressing it to her chest, and whispered, "What would you do, Papa?" She knew the answer. "Stand your ground." He'd said it 100 times. So when she heard that Obinna was planning to speak publicly, she decided she would be there, not to defend him, but to face him one last time. The next morning, the conference hall was packed. Reporters, cameras, live streams, all waiting for the city's most unpredictable man to explain himself. Obinna walked to the podium without notes. The room buzzed until he raised a hand, and then the hush came, a silence that made even the air hold its breath. "There's been a lot said about me these past weeks," he began. "Some of it true, most of it not. But this time, I want to speak for myself." His voice didn't carry the usual confidence. It was slower, rougher, human. "I built my fortune thinking success was measured in height, how high your towers stand, how loud your name rings. But I was wrong. I built those towers on other people's land, sometimes literally. One of those lands belonged to a man named Ease. I never met him, but I took his home away with a signature. His daughter grew up believing the world was unfair. She was right. The crowd shifted, murmurs rippling. That daughter is Amara Ease. You all know her name now. You know the viral video, the dance, the slap. But what you don't know is that she's the only person in this city brave enough to tell me the truth to my face. The cameras clicked wildly. His PR manager looked like she might faint. Obinna continued, I'm not here to redeem myself. Lagos doesn't believe in redemption. It believes in noise. I'm here because silence can destroy more than failure ever could. The center in Surulere will remain open, not as charity, not as rebranding. It belongs to Amara and the children who dance there. And as for me, he paused, voice cracking just slightly, I'll keep funding it until I'm broke, or until I understand what being human really means, whichever comes first. The room erupted in questions. Are you resigning from Kalu Holdings? Is this love or guilt? Have you spoken to Amara? He stepped back from the microphones, ignoring them all, and walked off stage. Outside, the rain had started again, light and cold. A familiar voice called from behind. You like confessing under rain, don't you? He turned. Amara stood under a small umbrella, expression unreadable. The cameras followed her instantly, but she ignored them. The guards tried to hold them back as she walked toward him, her limp still faint but visible. You didn't need to do that, she said quietly when they met under the awning. You just made the circus bigger. He shook his head. No, I made it honest. You deserved your name to be known for the right reason. She stared at him for a moment. You think the truth makes people kind? No, he said, but it keeps them from being comfortable. A car horn blared somewhere in the distance. The rain thickened. What do you want from me, Obinna? She asked softly, the exhaustion in her voice cutting deeper than anger ever could. He met her eyes. I want you to let me face what I did. That's all. She hesitated, her jaw tightening. And after that? After that, he said, you never have to see me again. They stood in silence, water dripping from the edge of the awning. Then she sighed. Come tomorrow. The children want to perform at the festival. If you really want to face something, face what your name means to them. The next day, the Surulere Arts Festival turned the streets into color and sound. Drums pounded, dancers filled the roads, and for a few hours, Lagos felt lighter. The community center's students were set to perform last. Amara arrived early, helping the kids line up, adjusting their costumes made of patched fabric and threadbare shoes. When Obinna showed up, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people clapped, others whispered. He didn't care. When the performance began, he stood at the back, watching. The children danced with the same raw joy Amara carried in every step. At the final beat, she joined them on stage, her movements slow, graceful, deliberate. The crowd roared, cameras flashed, but Obinna didn't move. His throat tightened, his eyes stung. For the first time, he saw what his power could have built all along, life instead of damage. After the applause, Amara walked over to him. Her face was sweaty, her smile faint but real. They wanted to thank you, she said, for keeping this place alive. He shook his head. No, you kept it alive. I just stopped killing it. She looked at him quietly, her expression softening. You're learning, Mr. Kalu. Obinna, he said. Just Obinna. The rain began again, as if Lagos itself had been waiting for the cue. Around them, the crowd scattered under umbrellas, laughter mixing with thunder. She turned to leave, but he caught her voice one last time through the noise. Amara, he said. She looked back, her eyes reflecting the grey sky. Thank you for not letting me stay blind. She nodded once. You were always going to see, you just needed the storm. Then she disappeared into the rain, her figure fading into the moving crowd. He stood there for a long time, soaked, unbothered, watching her vanish. Somewhere nearby, music started again, a tango this time, faint and trembling under the rain. Obinna smiled bitterly, shaking his head. Dance this tango and I'll marry you, he whispered to himself, almost laughing. But the laughter wasn't cruel anymore. It was quiet, heavy, alive. For days after the festival, Lagos could talk about nothing else. The video of Amara and the children dancing had flooded every screen. Markets, offices, taxis stuck in traffic. There was Obinna Kalu too, standing alone in the back, soaked in the rain, watching in silence. People argued about what it meant. Some said it was love, others called it a performance. But those who were there that day said something different. They said the air had changed, that for one brief moment the noise of the city paused, just long enough for everyone to feel something they couldn't name. Inside the mansion, Obinna refused interviews. He ignored calls, cancelled meetings, and shut the world out. The PR team begged him to give a statement to shape the narrative, but he laughed at the phrase. "The story doesn't belong to me anymore," he said, walking away from the cameras. He spent most of his time outside now, tending to the neglected garden his wife had planted years ago. The roses had withered to thorns, but under his care, small green shoots began to reappear. He'd never gardened before. He didn't know how, but he didn't need perfection, just patience. Sometimes, when the rain came at night, he'd hear the echo of drums from far away, from Surulere maybe, or maybe just from his own mind. The rhythm felt like heartbeat, like forgiveness traveling through the air. It reminded him that he was no longer the man who believed the city existed to serve him. Lagos was a mirror, and for the first time it was showing him his own reflection. Meanwhile, the community center thrived. The city's elite tried to donate money once the story gained sympathy online, but Amara refused. "If you want to help," she told them, "come and dance." They laughed, thinking she was joking, until they saw her teaching barefoot with the children, sweat soaking her dress, joy unpolished and real. Slowly, people began to show up, not to take pictures, but to move. Drivers, teachers, mothers, even police officers on break. The place became something no amount of money could have built, a home for motion and truth. One evening, a black car parked discreetly across the street. Obinna stepped out, wearing no suit this time, just a simple shirt and old jeans. The children spotted him first and shouted, "Uncle Obi!" He smiled at the nickname. It was the first time anyone had called him something that didn't sound heavy. Amara appeared in the doorway, her face framed by the sunset. "You came back," she said quietly. "I never really left," he replied. She crossed her arms, but there was no hostility in her eyes, only exhaustion mixed with something softer. "You caused enough chaos to last the whole year, Mr. Kalu." He grinned faintly. "Then maybe I can spend the next year cleaning it up." She shook her head, half amused, half wary. "You don't know when to stop. Neither do you," he said, and that made her laugh, an unguarded sound that felt like rain hitting hot ground. That night, they sat outside on the steps after the children had gone home. The streetlights flickered, the city hummed around them, alive, endless. He told her about the garden, how the roses were growing again. She told him about a new student, a boy who couldn't walk properly but wanted to learn rhythm through his arms. They sat for hours, two people whose lives had collided in all the wrong ways but somehow found their rhythm in the same silence. "I used to think everything could be measured," he said after a long pause. "Money, success, love. Then you came and turned it all into movement." She smiled faintly. "Movement is the only thing that's real. The rest is decoration." He nodded slowly, watching her face in the dim light. "You said once that I dance when I want to feel human. Maybe that's true, but now I think I dance when I want to remember who I am." Amara looked at him quietly. "Then don't stop." He turned toward her, his voice almost a whisper. "Will you dance with me?" She hesitated. "There's no music." "There's always music," he said, standing and extending his hand. She rolled her eyes but placed her palm in his. And there it was again, the tango. Not the grand ballroom kind from that night at the mansion, but something smaller, slower, honest. The rhythm came from the city itself, the hum of engines, a distant generator, a radio playing somewhere far away. They moved together in the half-dark, feet brushing against the cracked pavement, shadows swaying on the wall behind them. No crowd, no spotlight, no mockery, just two people dancing at the edge of everything they had destroyed and rebuilt. When the dance ended, she didn't let go immediately. Their hands lingered, caught between goodbye and beginning. Then she stepped back, her eyes bright but steady. "You should go," she said softly. "The city still needs its millionaire." He smiled. "Lagos has enough of those. What it needs are people who remember how to feel." She turned away, walking toward the door. "Then keep feeling, Obinna. Just don't make the mistake of thinking it's mine to give." He watched her disappear inside, the faint sound of laughter following her. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to chase or to fix. The quiet between them was enough. Weeks later, during another heavy downpour, Lagos experienced one of its frequent blackouts. The city plunged into darkness, and in the brief hush that followed, someone in the neighborhood began to hum a tango tune, a song carried by the wind. Somewhere across town, in a mansion now stripped of its noise, Obinna turned off his phone, opened the window and let the rain in. He stood barefoot on the marble floor, eyes closed, moving slowly to the rhythm only he could hear. No audience, no wealth, just a man and his heartbeat. At the same time, in Surulere, Amara danced with the children by candlelight, laughter spilling into the storm. One of the girls asked, "Auntie, why do we always dance when it rains?" Amara smiled, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "Because rain reminds us that even the sky needs to let go." By morning, the storm passed, and a rainbow arched faintly over the city. The headlines had already moved on to new scandals, new names. But those who had witnessed that strange, beautiful story between a maid and a millionaire never forgot the ending. They said there was no proposal, no wedding, no grand reconciliation, only a final dance that nobody filmed. And in a city that thrived on noise, that kind of silence felt almost sacred. Lagos, for once, had run out of words. And if this story moved something inside you, even a little, take a moment to subscribe. There are many more stories like this one, where hearts meet, fall, break, and rise again in unexpected places. Don't just watch, be part of the next dance.